Well, Kat, talking about, being new parents, but also the challenges there in terms of our relationships for those of us who have been parents for a long time as well. And I guess when it comes to our marriages and our relationships, what perspective can we bring to how parenting impacts our marriages, and what can we do to have them continue to thrive through this journey of parenthood?
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? Parenting isn't necessarily an easy task, right? I remember the story of when we first became parents. So, Jonah was our son. He's 3 now. So I'd say probably we're somewhat fresh in that journey, which just means, I guess, the things that we share are, very close to the heart and also very, I guess, relevant because we're practicing them, as we speak. But I remember, Jonah made us parents, and I remember leaving the hospital. He was born in hospital. I remember leaving the hospital with our son, Jonah, as new parents, and almost thinking, is this legal? Am I allowed to take
I reckon. And how about when you drive back from the birth centre and you're going like 5 kilometres an hour because you're like precious cargo in the back, precious cargo in the back.
Everything's changed.
That's the one. Everything changed, right? So, can we really ever be adequately prepared to be parents? I don't know that we can, but, it is part of the journey. The journey does prepare us. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge those listeners that, may not have that joy of, being parents. For many reasons, some couples struggle to have kids of their own. But I'm going to circle back to those listeners in a moment because, the journey of parenting is one of getting on the same page as a couple. It's one of building a new thing as a couple, your family.
Yeah.
And it's one of taking responsibilities, so it's a very natural outflow of the marriage to conceive and, give birth to children. Of course, in the case that that's not your reality, there are other things that as a couple you could be quote unquote parenting, and I want to sort of take those same principles and
there may be people
to everyone
right now that are potentially fostering or looking after other children that aren't their biological children, and just acknowledging the fact that also parenting is a challenge, and no matter how people find themselves getting into it, because some people become parents without being fully ready for it as well. What could you say to couples that are finding that right now parenting their children for various reasons is actually putting quite a strain on their relationships?
Yeah, look, for couples in that early parenting season, I would definitely say if you can keep at least the pilot light running during this season, it does get less busy, and sometimes there are things like health challenges, but in particularly with, new babies, it is really difficult to prioritize your marriage, your relationship, when you have another little person in the house that is demanding all your energy and all your time and attention.
I think it's hard enough to prioritize having a shower at that stage.
Exactly. And,
That's
right.
I
always remember we did a podcast with Brad Carr, who is one of our guest speakers at the Weekend to Remember. And he mentioned this thing where, he said, I never made my marriage vows to my children. I made them to Rochelle, which is the name of his wife. And I think that's so important to remember, because even though, and I think he said it so beautifully, I would take a bullet for my kids, right? I would lay down my life for them. But they always, they never take priority over my spouse. And I think we'd be wise to remember that. If our marriage relationship is thriving, if we know that we are each other's priority, that will give us the power and strength and energy to actually take care of our kids well. We were actually designed by God to be parents. We were designed to be in relationship, and then from that relationship, we are designed to be parents. So if we get that order right, there's just a tremendous amount of grace that flows into that structure, the way God had actually designed it.
I think it's God's way of showing us just a taste of that sacrificial kind of love that he had for us, Jesus laying his life down. we don't really get a taste of that, because until you have kids of your own, you're very much just looking after your immediate needs, or perhaps your husband or wife's needs in those instances. But when you have little people to look after, whether they're your own or other people, it's very much a laying down of all your objectives in that moment and potentially for the next 18, 20 years.
When we talk about parenting, Vaynant, in our relationships too, the realities of the pressures of parenting are real. But I look back on, 16 years of parenting too. And I guess the other thing for me personally, I'm like, it can also really be something that can enhance our relationships, because I look at my marriage now after 19 years and think so much of that has been as parents, and has built so much into our relationship. So, if we look at this, we're not really talking about parenting advice, but do you have a key that could set parents up to be successful as parents in their marriage? What would that key be?
Yeah, Tom, I'm so glad you raised that point, because our relationships can either, carry the brunt of parenting, or it can also, bear the fruit of parenting. What I mean by that is, if we're not on the same page, if our parenting styles drive us apart, it's actually going to cause issues in our relationship in the long run. So the best key, or the best word of advice I could give, to parents is to get on the same page when it comes to parenting, even when you disagree. Now, that is not an easy task to do. But like you mentioned already, Kat, is children would sort of, they would see that that weakening in the force, and they would play on that, just because they're children, not because they're bad people. But
yeah, I mentioned that off air, actually.
Oh, you mentioned that off air.
Confessions of behind the scenes.
Confessions behind the scenes. Well, that's the thing, right? Kids will look for their boundaries, because boundaries actually make them feel safe. But as parents, are we unified in our style of parenting? And are we willing to recognize that sometimes I will lead and other times I will follow in the way that we parent in any given situation? But this can only happen, we can only parent from the same page if we make time to discuss our different styles, preferences, and here's the important one, the vision we have for our family. So we need to start with our spouse, get on the same page. What is the vision? Where are we going? What styles do we bring into the relationship? And then make it a family discussion. And it's never too late to start doing the right thing.